I'm John Chowney with Campbellsville University, welcoming you once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. Today, my guest is Jordan Harris, the Executive Director of the Pegasus Institute, headquartered in Louisville. And the Pegasus Institute is an emerging group of millennials who are having increased impact on Kentucky public policy. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Always good to be in Campbellsville.
Well, welcome. I should have said welcome again, because this is the second time you've visited Campbellsville University and taken time to do our show, and we appreciate that very much.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, and you've had a rich experience for a young man.
That's very true. Yeah, I grew up here in Kentucky. I grew up in Breckinridge County. So I was born and raised in Kentucky. I was gone for about 10 years. I went to undergraduate education at Penn State University, graduate education at Harvard University, studied under one of my idols at Harvard named Harvey Mansfield, who is one of the preeminent conservative intellectuals still alive. He's 84 years old. I served as research assistant. In addition to that, working on what will be his last book, which is a humbling experience for somebody who you idolize so much. But I had a wonderful experience and I've worked in politics and policy for the overwhelming majority of my still young life, but was working for a think tank in Boston and knew that I wanted to get back home at some point. There were a lot of policy issues here in Kentucky that I thought that we could make a difference on. And about 2.5 years ago, or 2 years and 3 months ago, my wife and I moved to Louisville. We started Pegasus Institute. I did, as well as my closest friend from undergrad, Josh Crawford. And we've grown the organization tremendously. We have the largest staff of any think tank in Kentucky now. We've grown the budget tremendously and had a big impact, and it's been a great 2 years.
Now, was your associate, was he a Kentucky native?
No, he has no affiliation to Kentucky at all. He grew up in Massachusetts, and he was working in California in the Sacramento County District Attorney's office at the time. When I called him one morning and said, "How would you like to give up practice in law and move to Kentucky?" And he said, "Well, it's 4 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast. Why don't you call me back later?" He had only been to Kentucky one time, and it was in January. It wasn't like he was here for Derby Day or something great. And so he had no affiliation with Kentucky whatsoever, but was able to really persuade his wife that it was a good idea. And once I persuaded his wife it was a good idea, then he followed suit.
Now, explain the significance of calling it the Pegasus Institute. Why that name?
Well, Kentucky, one of our main competitive advantages, obviously, is our horses.
Right.
In Greek mythology, Pegasus was, of course, the horse god, but perhaps more importantly, in Greek mythology, Pegasus symbolized wisdom. And so we always say that over the course of our work, we hope we gain some. But it was important to honor both of those things, to honor that sort of cultural contribution that Kentucky has through the best horses in the world, but also to give an ode to that.
Now, what is the mission of the Pegasus Institute?
Yeah, we do public policy research that on a wide range of subjects: the economy, education, criminal justice, state government, on issues that need to be fixed or that need improvement, with the ultimate goal of improving the lives of all Kentuckians.
Is there an ideological bend to the general perspective of the Institute?
Yeah, what I would say is that we tend to favor the free market as a general rule. We tend to favor sort of self-government as a general rule. But we believe that government has a role, and we believe that state government plays a very important role. Our goal isn't to simply roll back everything that government does. We want to see government operate efficiently. The things that can be given back to the market or given back to the people and handled best by the people, we want to see that done. But we believe absolutely that government has a role, and that self-government is one of the greatest accomplishments of the American system.
So it wouldn't be accurate to call the Institute a libertarian institute in the true sense.
I wouldn't say libertarian. I would say, we certainly have an affiliation with conservative thought,
right.
Or what would be considered sort of classical liberalism in the European sense. That would be a more accurate kind of depiction of where Josh and I come from issues, and many of the other people who we work with approach issues. Now, there are members of our organizations who do call themselves libertarian. They're fellow travelers on many issues, but the balance between the market and strong self-government is really what we focus on.
How would you distinguish the Pegasus Institute from other existing right of center think tanks, public policy issue advocate groups?
Yeah. Whenever we set out to build the organization, the primary thing that we wanted to accomplish was to be a resource to legislators and to build those relationships and be able to sort of work within the system to get positive things done. I mean, some of the things that distinguish us as an organization is we don't attack legislators, whether we disagree or agree. We don't attack legislators in public. Our job is really to persuade and to be a resource to the best that we can. And so we do research on specific issues, and we advocate diligently for that research and for the policy conclusions that we come to. But you'll never see us sending mailers in a political campaign or endorsing a candidate or saying that X, Y, and Z is bad or about an individual. Our job more than anything is to be a resource, and at the times when we disagree with legislators, we have to kind of move on and try to persuade them the next time.
So you don't do candidate questionnaires and voter education per se.
No candidate questionnaires,
endorsements.
no scorecards,
Right.
no things like that. Now, look, there's places for other organizations to do that, but our organization and our function is to really be kind of the bridge between the academic level and the political level, to take the ideas that, in the academy, the ideas exist in sort of a utopian vacuum in some ways, and it's very important that the academy is able to do that. In the political sphere, it's all about what's practical, what works for messaging, things like that. Our job is really to be the bridge between those two things, to take the academic idea and make sure that it can be packaged into something that's achievable on a policy level.
Your vision statement from your website speaks of, quote, Kentucky emerging as a national leader and beacon of the New South.
Yeah.
What exactly do you have in mind there, and why should that be of interest to the average Kentuckian?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that I came back home to Kentucky was because Kentucky's at the bottom of the barrel on a whole list of things that you don't want to be at the bottom of, and at the top of a bunch of lists that you don't want to be at the top of. There are a lot of ways in which our public policy has failed. There are a lot of ways in which we haven't been able to sort of take advantage of some of the benefits from our system. Now, we view Kentucky as being well positioned, not only just geographically in the country, but well positioned in a lot of different areas that it could lead. Culturally, we have one of the best cultures of any state in the country. We have some unique advantages that allow us to really move forward if we're able to kind of get public policy in line and we're able to achieve some of those things. And so whenever we say that the state can be a beacon of the New South, whenever we say that the state can be a national leader, it's with all those things in mind. The idea that if we take what's really great about Kentucky and we enhance those things and we work diligently to fix some of those major problems, there's no reason that over the course of the next 50, 70, 100 years, Kentucky can't be one of the most robust economies in the country and one of the most significant, from a cultural standpoint, states in the country.
Are there any particular states that Kentucky should emulate in the context of the South?
Well, when you think about the South, Texas is really, in many ways, the driver. But states like Georgia have done significant things over the last 50 years to help push that state forward economically. In Atlanta alone, every Fortune 500 company is represented in one form or another, with an office or with employees in some form in the city of Atlanta. When we're looking at what Tennessee's done over the past 25 years, the growth of Nashville is exceptional, remarkable. Nashville has the lowest unemployment rate of any major city in the United States. It's 2.6% right now. It's unbelievable. So there are southern states that have done a lot of things to push forward. Whenever the governor talks about being the beacon of engineering or being the beacon of manufacturing, he's absolutely spot on that Kentucky is well positioned to take that torch and run with it if we can do the right things. There's been a lot of reinvestment in the South in the past 50 years. A lot of industries that were in the North or in the Midwest have moved their operations south. It's really kind of a different time period for the American South, but there's big opportunity for Kentucky to take advantage of that.
Have you taken a look at the data from around 1960 to the current, to 2018? And back in 1960, roughly, given a decade or so, we were pretty competitive.
Yeah.
Our standing was comparable to North Carolina,
Yes, very
for
much so.
example, and other states in the South that were sort of on the cutting edge. What happened?
Well, there are some states that have some competitive advantages that we don't, North Carolina being one. You're absolutely right that North Carolina had some of the same challenges that we had, and in some ways was in our rearview mirror when you look at the numbers from the 1950s and in the 1960s. North Carolina did some really smart things from an economic standpoint, but they're also benefited, of course, by having a giant coast on one side. That's obviously something that we'll never be able to fix, being a landlocked state. Whenever you're a state like ours that doesn't have the ocean on one side, that doesn't have mountains, that doesn't have some of those natural resources that draw in talent, that draw in people, really the best things that you can do is ensure that you're economically competitive, ensure that you have a business climate that's attractive, ensure that you have a business climate that not only pulls in outside investment but helps people grow businesses within the state. That's one of the biggest things that Kentucky has done or failed to do over the past 50 years that have been a negative, that have had a negative effect. One of the other major things, and this is always worthwhile to say when you're on a college campus, is that as the economy has changed over that time period, over that 50 or 60 year time period, Kentucky hasn't necessarily changed in its thinking. In that time period, in that 50 to 60 years, we've moved from an economy that was largely product-driven to a more service-driven economy, an economy that requires a higher level of educational attainment, an economy that rewards a higher level of educational attainment. Kentucky is still in the bottom 10 states in baccalaureate attainment, still in the bottom 10 states in overall educational attainment. Some of those other states that have moved past us, whether it's Tennessee, whether it's Indiana, whether it's North Carolina, some of the other states that have some of the same challenges, have done a good job of creating competitive business climates and building up their educational attainment, building up their baccalaureate attainment to make sure that they have a workforce that's prepared to take on the challenges of a changing economy.
If you look at Kentucky, the demographics of Kentucky's Golden Triangle, I'm not making a disparaging remark about the Golden Triangle, but facts are facts. And Louisville, Lexington, Northern Kentucky, if you look at their status to national norms, they've done fairly well. Not great, but they've done better than the balance of the state. And they're moving, and that gap appears to be increasing. And that, of course, is a phenomenon between urban and rural nationwide. But specifically to Kentucky, what can we do without policymakers saying, well, why don't you rural people move to the urban areas? It's not quite that simple. What can we do to bump rural Kentucky, particularly eastern Kentucky, pockets around the state? And then within the urban context, certainly we have economic issues in the west end of Louisville, as well as in some pockets within other urban areas. But specifically on rural Kentucky, what can we do public policy-wise at the state level? And I know there's no silver bullet.
There's certainly not a silver bullet. And to your point, though, this problem is really exacerbated by the Great Recession. One of the interesting things, we kind of have this great data source as kind of a change point and a starting point, beginning in 2008 with the Great Recession, to kind of measure the way in which the economy has changed, to measure the way in which the economy has recovered since the end of the Great Recession. As your question indicates, urban areas have recovered in a completely different way than rural areas. And a lot of the industries that were driving our economy before the recession have either gone away or have not recovered with the same level of strength. The number one thing that I think that we have to recognize from a policymaking standpoint is that we have to develop a workforce that is flexible for a service-driven economy. We have to build a bridge to the service economy, if you will. That's the number one thing that's going to benefit rural areas. That's not just true in rural areas, of course, but that's going to benefit the economy as a whole. And I agree with the comment that you made that the solution is not simply for everybody to move to the Golden Triangle, for everybody to move to Bowling Green. Bowling Green's had wonderful advancements
Absolutely.
economically as well. That isn't the only solution. There's still a tremendous value, obviously, in rural America, and driving around Campbellsville today, that's 100% clear. But the same thing that's true about the trends that have impacted those urban areas can be beneficial in the rural areas. Sure. There's higher level of educational attainment as a general rule. There's usually business climates that are a little bit more competitive in some instances. Some of the same state policies that can be enacted that have already had benefits in the urban areas can have just as much benefit in rural areas. We need workforces developed that can be flexible. We need entrepreneurial attitudes that can help develop the next business climate, but we also that can develop the next great businesses. But we also have to make sure that we have a business climate that doesn't strangle that entrepreneurship, even whether it happens here in Campbellsville, whether it happens in Harlan County, Kentucky, whether it happens in the county that I grew up in, Breckinridge County, Kentucky. Some of those same principles are just as applicable to the rural areas as they are to the urban
What do we
areas.
need to do? And you've touched on it just a bit in that response, but Kentucky as a whole, we've made some steps toward being more business friendly under the current legislative leadership and governor. What else needs to be done going into the 2019 session? What would you advise from the Institute's perspective to make Kentucky more business friendly, more competitive?
Yeah, our organization has worked quite diligently on that question and on what can be done to help improve the business climate. Whenever we look at a lot of our neighboring states, we've taken great strides to lower our marginal income tax rates and our marginal corporate tax rates. Those rates need to continue to come down. When we look north to Indiana, Indiana has a 3.23% income tax rate. It's less reliant on the local level on occupational taxes. This is one of the things that sometimes gets lost in this conversation. We get really focused on the national tax rates. We get focused on the national things that impact businesses, and the state things. We sometimes fail to see the things on a local level that are having a negative impact. Kentucky's economy as a whole, whenever we look at workforce participation, we're 44th in the country. We have workforce participation below 60% of
a major issue.
A huge issue. As I look at if you say what are the two stats that are most alarming about Kentucky, labor force participation, baccalaureate attainment. Those two are together. As I look into the 21st century, what are the challenges that Kentucky's going to face? What are the things that need to be fixed? What are the things that need to be remedied? Those two things are the biggest things that stand out. So we need to continue to bring those rates down. We need to continue to sort of broaden the base, lower the rates, kind of an age-old economic adage. We need to make the system more simple. Right now it's complex. It favors large corporations. It doesn't necessarily favor the organization here in Campbellsville that might have 20 employees, that has the potential to grow to 120 employees, that, you know, if given the right resources, if the capital stays home, if we don't have to deal with the complexity or doesn't have a loophole that benefits it, can flourish and make a huge difference in the rural areas. So those are some of the things that have to happen from an economic standpoint or from a business standpoint to move forward.
Some leaders speak of a renaissance in manufacturing.
Yeah.
And obviously that sounds good.
Yeah.
To when running for office, and as I often say, no one ever runs against jobs and economic development. I haven't heard a politician yet say that. But is that really realistic? You know, in terms of the small towns, back to rural America, rural Kentucky, is that really with trade policies? You know, with NAFTA being renegotiated. For example, let's be honest, Fruit of the Loom is not going to come back to Campbellsville, Kentucky. Yeah. No one said that, but that's an example of I do think there are people out there who really felt like some of, you know, maybe the textile industry would make a comeback. Yeah. If we could just have more fair trade.
Yeah.
Comment, please.
Yeah, the way in which that economy existed is not going to come back, and to be honest, to get it back in the exact way that it existed before would require us to do things that people really don't want.
Right.
That it would require steps that people really don't want us to have to take. It would affect, consumer spending and a bunch of other factors in such a negative way that it would be very much a step back from an economic standpoint. There are some opportunities for Kentucky to kind of grow its manufacturing footprint. I do not think the governor is off base by any stretch when he says things like that Kentucky can sort of be the Germany of the United States, that there's no state that's distinguished itself. But manufacturing in 2018 and 2028 and 2038 is going to look completely different than manufacturing did in 1998 or 1978. It's in some ways a completely different operation. Most people think of the manufacturing or think of kind of the factory shop floor as being dirty and all of those coming home with your hands dirty, those sorts of things. The truth is, if you go to some of the advanced manufacturing, which in northern Kentucky, there are more people in northern Kentucky, in the 3 northern Kentucky counties, working in advanced manufacturing than we have people in the coal business in the state of Kentucky. If you go to some of those factories, those advanced manufacturing factories, you can eat off the floor in these places. It's a completely different sort of environment, which is, I think, one of the things that students sometimes don't understand, one of the things that young people don't understand, but also sometimes when we hear politicians talk about bringing these things back, don't understand. Now, the flip side of that is that the skill set is not always the same, that it requires a little bit of extra training to be able and to be prepared for that. There was a point in time in this country when if you got a high school diploma and a pulse, you could get a pretty good job that would probably allow you to have a mortgage and a pretty good middle-class life. That's not necessarily the way this economy works. That's not necessarily the way this economy is ever going to work again. But there can be a competitive advantage. There can certainly be movement on manufacturing in Kentucky, but it's never going to be quite the same way as it was before.
Well, trade policies cost us some jobs, no question.
Yeah.
But not to the extent that we sometimes think.
Right.
In my opinion, at least.
No, it's
and
the data backs that up.
automation and technology, and productivity by automation and technology have taken away the person, the number of persons we need, more so, in my opinion, than we could document jobs going overseas just for the sake of going overseas.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think that individuals and politicians both get stressed a little bit about that fact.
Sure.
Whether we talk about automation or we talk about there's a smaller workforce required for manufacturing. There was a point in time when the amount of people in agriculture in the United States was like 19 to 1 or something like that. And now it's 3% of the workforce I always think about political observers who would be doing exactly what we're doing right now in 1905. If they tried to predict what the rest of the century was going to look like, if they tried to think about horse and buggy production, if they tried to think about all of these factors that would have stressed them out about the changing economy, still dealing with the Industrial Revolution at the time, still dealing with some of the, constant changes, they had no way to predict the way in which the economy was going to change and grow over the course of that century. But it worked out pretty well. The American people are pretty innovative, and the American people are pretty entrepreneurial. And as long as sometimes if government gets out of their way, if bureaucracy gets out of their way, the American people tend to figure out how to make it work.
Does the Pegasus Institute have some concern about the pressures in Washington for more protectionist trade policies?
We absolutely
and the impact that has on Kentucky's economy?
We absolutely do. I mean, there are specific industries that are negatively impacted by that. It's not just the bourbon industry.
Right.
Bourbon industry is an obvious one, but automobile manufacturing is a large part of our economy here in Kentucky. Depending on how you measure it, it's the first or second largest sector of the economy, a growing sort of aluminum sector in Kentucky's economy. There are a lot of aspects that are negatively impacted. Protectionist policies are problematic. It doesn't matter who's which party's in the White House. We know there's a long history of data, there's a long history of agreement among economists that protectionist policies are, for the most part, a negative, or almost entirely a negative, and that even though there might be some positives to specific interest groups, those are offset by the larger negatives that exist.
It is a threat looming over Kentucky's economy as well as the national economy.
Completely.
It could affect. Now, we've seen the recent movement toward an agreement, the so-called U.S.-Mexico-Canadian agreement replacing NAFTA. Frankly, it's a tweaking of NAFTA in all truth. It's not a major rewrite. Probably the biggest thing right now is the European Union, and then the big one is Chinese trade relations with China. And that has an impact on Kentucky, believe it or not.
Oh, it has a major impact on Kentucky, and people would be surprised to learn how many sectors of our economy are directly impacted by some of those relationships. I mean, the world is unbelievably interconnected, and that's a really positive thing in almost every way. I mean, it's a positive thing in that, it helps avoid large conflicts. It can be a negative thing because that means that every industry has to compete against every industry, and sometimes there are losers in a free market economy, or there's going to be winners, there's going to be people who come out on top, there's going to be people who don't. I just made reference to this, but the thing about the American people is that the American system and the American people have always found ways to be entrepreneurial. They've always found ways to navigate these challenges. They've done it exceptionally well. I talked about the last century. The last century, we dealt with a depression that was far, far worse than the recession that we dealt with 10 years ago. We dealt with 2 world wars, and a very serious enemy in the Soviet Union, and literally built the greatest economy in the history of human civilization. And so there's no reason to stress ourselves too much about some of those things as long as we depend on the American people.
Absolutely. Very resilient economy and culture and country. Yeah. We're about out of time. We'll have to continue. We didn't even get into the 2019 General Assembly meeting or the Kentucky pension problems and so forth. So, Jordan, thank you so much.
Thank you, as always.
Absolutely. Jordan Harris, Executive Director of the Pegasus Institute. And we thank our audience for being with us once again for Dialogue on Public Issues.